Welcome to the Power Monkey podcast, where we chat with the best in the world about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, and my co-host this week is Mike Service, and we are really excited about this episode. We were lucky enough to get Adrian Bozman, of course better known as Boz in the CrossFit community, to be on with us after having programmed his first CrossFit Games. We got him on just a couple of days post-Madison, post all the craziness of 2022 CrossFit Games, and we had a little bit of insight into what his thought process was going into the games, how he programmed the events, what this emphasis was on skill development, what that means for the future of the games. I love talking with Boz. I think we're really lucky to have our perspectives on movement align really well. Here's some things from Boz that also, if you've ever come to a Power Monkey course or a Power Monkey camp, you'll hear some of the exact same things in terms of how we approach movement. I think it was amazing to hear a little bit of his background in terms of coming from the circus world and how that translates into what he believes to be important in terms of skill development, what we can anticipate maybe for some next games and next year in terms of what are some things to look out for. I love talking with Boz. He's one of these people that just is easy to talk to, knows his stuff inside and out, and I think we're lucky to have him in the community in the new position that he has now, being the director of the CrossFit Games. So I hope you guys enjoy this one. Hope you get something interesting out of it. Well, Boz, thanks so much for taking the time. It's been a crazy few weeks. I'm sure a crazy year for you. But first off, congrats on a successful CrossFit Games in your new position. How you feeling post everything completing?
Well, first, thanks for having me. Real pleasure. I'm a big fan of you guys, and I feel great. I feel tired. This week has not been productive at all, which it's not supposed to be, so that's been good. Mm-hmm. Today's the first day I actually got up and did something physical. I just got back from my bike ride, so I hop back on the whip, and yeah, I've been real tired, but very satisfied with the way things went. First time at the helm in this role. A lot of pressure, both self-induced and otherwise. And my entire goal is just to make things awesome. I've been saying this all week, but it's really important to me that it's awesome for the spectators and fans. It's awesome for affiliate owners and coaches. It's awesome for the staff and awesome for the athletes. So that's it. I mean, how much simpler can you get? I just want to make it awesome for everybody.
Sure. I mean, and you had some significant shoes to fill with Dave had moved on from the position. And coming from head judge, was this a role that you kind of envision yourself being successful at, something that you wanted to take on? Was this something that you had kind of helped out and from the maybe behind the screen were trying to work your way into over the years prior to getting the position?
No, I mean, I had no aspirations of being in this seat. And the way it happened, Dave got fired, and that was pretty unexpected. So, it landed on me to fill a lot of those responsibilities. The good news in that is CrossFit has always been an organization where we are expected to do many things. Like, it's rare for those of us that have been around a long time that your job description, so to speak, is this narrowly defined, I only do this thing, and that's not my job. Like, you never hear somebody say that's been around the CrossFit world for a long time. Oh, that's not my job. No, that doesn't exist. So plenty of cross-pollination in the past, and I certainly felt like, if it was to be my responsibility, I was qualified for it. But at the same time, we'd never done a games without Dave. We'd never done a games in this way. So it was a big question mark. And it did certainly created a lot of sleepless nights, but spent my time doing my homework, and I think it paid off. So yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously it's an exciting time for you, right? We had this games, and going into it, we had Sherwood on the podcast a few weeks ago, and we were asking
that guy,
like,
man.
Yeah.
Terrible choice.
I just want you to know that I refused to be on that episode. So
yeah, good.
Adrian,
out of principle.
I saved myself for you. So
perfect. I appreciate that. He's no, I love Pat. For those of you that don't get the joke, Pat's a great friend of mine and an awesome guy. And you should all be listening to whatever he has to say, because he is a wealth of understated knowledge.
Absolutely. We loved having a discussion with him about programming and about the way he runs his gym and all those fun things. But one of the things he was saying to you was like, use this opportunity. Like, he didn't have any idea what you were going to do on the programming side, but he was just like, throw it all out there. Like, you're going to get shit from both sides, no matter what you program. He's like, just leave it out there. And it
Yep.
seemed like you did that. Now,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
curious from your perspective. One, it seemed like you pulled a lot from Glassman's 100 fitness in 100 words in terms of some of the new exercises we saw out there, but there were a significant number of new movements. From my count, there were about 10, like even some small variations. Was the intention to do something like that where like, hey, I'm going to pull out all the things that I wish I would have seen in the games over the years, handstand pirouettes and P-bar traverses and whatever else it might be? Was the intention to kind of like bring out a ton of new exercises to be able to kind of set your place as the new program for the games?
No, I mean, nothing, very, very little to do with me and trying to make a name for myself, and more so, I just did what I believe to be the right thing to do for the test. And the CrossFit as a sport is not about, at the games level anyway, not about like, hey, let's do the thing that you've already done. Let's do the thing that you've already proved competency in. That's not the name of the game. The name of the game is who can take their training and be well prepared enough that if things come out the pipe that are a little unorthodox or not quite what you're used to seeing, you can adapt and overcome because you've trained for that. And I think we saw that over and over again. Like I look at the sandbag ladder as one of the most amazing examples of that. There were so many athletes that said, I don't know that I can do this. I struggled in the warm up, and yet they came out and, I mean, both the men's and women's field defied our expectations in that. They all made it further than we thought we would. The field was way, way more able to accomplish that. And so it just goes to show that even when they doubt themselves, their level of preparation is so high that they can figure it out. And that really is the test. And so I look at it a few ways. Number one, it's a long season to get to the games. These guys have done the open, quarterfinals, a semifinal, sometimes the last chance qualifier. So you're looking at, 3 to 4 robust competitions already. When they get to the games, it's not enough to just say, okay, well, it's going to be, some more thrusters and pull-ups. Like, sure, those have a place, but it's not good enough to test that caliber of athlete with something that they've already seen at earlier stages in the season. You got to push it a little bit further. You have to stretch them a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it was exciting to watch. Especially, I think we were getting so many comments throughout the weekend about the number of gymnastics movements, the P-bar traverse, the handstand pirouetting, the handstand hold. I don't want to call it a press to handstand because it wasn't really a press to handstand, but the idea
This
of
is
going
just a
from
low start. I called it a low. I was the
low
same
start,
way
yeah.
as a.
I love how you call it a low start. I thought that was great. But all of these new things from the gymnastics side were exciting for us to be able to say,
Yeah.
hey, look at what you can be working on. It's not just these X number of skills that we've seen time and time again. You
Yeah.
can be working on, especially on, gymnastics. We're still kind of in this level 4, 3, 2. These kids like
Yep.
6 and 8-year-old movements. We can be working towards things that are a little bit more advanced, and it just takes time for people to be exposed to them. And I
Yep.
think you're doing a good job with that. But
Thank
was
you.
there a movement out there that you were really excited to see done, like one that you had tested out, and were like, I would love to see how the athletes kind of tackle this particular one?
Yeah, yes, but before we get to that, I like to think big picture, and like I kind of ramble philosophically sometimes, so I'm going to do that.
Go
So
for
cut
it.
me off when I get a little too far out there, but
My heart's swelling, boss. Just let it flow. All right. Philosophy.
but yeah, I think that if there is a message in this year's games, it is that it's not enough. If you're interested in CrossFit as a sport and indeed a training methodology, if you are of the mindset that you are training things specifically because that's the way you expect them to show up in competition and you do not expand outside of that, you are not doing it correctly. That's never been what CrossFit is about. It's not about, well, this is how I expect the handstand push-up to show up. Ergo, I only do handstand push-ups in this way and I maximize my efficiency at this one specialized competition technique. You're doing it wrong, flat out, if that's your approach. The philosophy is, how do I expand my skill set to the point that it doesn't matter how it shows up? I'm ready for it. And, I think we saw that a few times over the course of this games. And like, so more broadly for the average person, skill development for its own sake is worth endeavoring in. And that's something that we need to get back to, in my opinion. I think a lot of people are still there, but there's been a lot of people that are competition minded that have kind of lost that. They don't see the value in pursuing something difficult and technical because they think, oh, it will never show up in competition. Okay, fine. Even if it doesn't, there's still benefit to training that way for the other attributes that it helps to push along. You know, it'd be absurd for you to say, I'm not going to deadlift because it's unlikely that the deadlift is going to show up in competition. No, you see the utility in gaining strength in the deadlift because it carries over to other activities. Same thing when we're talking about some of these other skills. You might never see that press to handstand come up again, but the fact that you can do it and you can control your body that way is going to pay off dividends in other things that will show up. And so that's the philosophy that people need to get back to. And I get fired up talking about it a little bit because, again,
I'm crying.
You're speaking our love languages right now, Adrian.
Yeah,
this is exactly what we teach. Mike, go for it.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I mean, in initial thoughts, I was, you know, of course, I'm a purist with weightlifting, so I love seeing heavy snatches and clean and jerks. But at the same time, sometimes they don't look very nice or functional or practical when people perform them. So getting to see the athletes go out and do this, you know, max sandbag lift where all of them had to go into a really deep squat to pick that up. Oh, yeah. Actually have some lower lumbar flexion to show some strength and aptitude in that position, and then be able to stand up and fully extend. And for me, that like closed a lot of arguments for people that are constantly asking me why they need to squat all the way down, or why they need to practice certain ranges of motion. And my answer is always because it's going to maximize your potential to be a better human. Like that's one. And because I believe that, and all of us, you know, especially Dave and I believe that the human body is, you know, meant to go into full ranges and become, you know, strong and mobile in those ranges. So yeah, your ability to, like you say, test what you felt like needed tested, it went across the board for me. It made me so happy.
Yeah, well, thanks. And so to get to your kind of root question earlier, Dave, you know, there were a lot of quote new movements, but when you look at it, at least when I look at it, none of them, with maybe the exception of the low start, was that exotic. And I mean, a parallel bar traverse, come on, like I'm preaching to the choir here, but you see the way those guys can navigate obstacles on their hands. You think that a support position is going to be difficult for them. Okay, maybe they haven't done it specifically, but like, give me a break. It's not that crazy. This is a really rudimentary thing. Yeah, it shows up and it adds some fatigue to the dips and it's a challenge. Absolutely, no question. But to say that this is some big exotic break from the norm is, I mean, you're out of your mind if that's what you're saying. And you see that time and time again, like a hop over a log. You know, you got to show some athleticism. For those guys, they should be able to rise to that when they're fatigued. That's the whole point. And so if you go down the list of all the quote unquote new things, I think there's only one or two examples where something is really technically that much more difficult than what they've been doing in the past. So, so like the two that I would say I was most excited about, like obviously the low start, that was awesome. And you know, Nick Matthew, what a champ. Man. That was so fun, man. What a superstar. Yep. And Guy as well. I mean, he just looked like a rocket ship coming out of that shoulder stand. Yep. And third try, he got it too. Yep. He just didn't have enough time to finish up, but he got it. And so there you go. I mean, a testament to how good those guys are, that they can figure it out on the fly. It's so cool to see. Yeah,
I completely agree. And like I was saying, what you went off a little bit on your perspective on how things are being programmed and your approach to it. And it really fits in exactly with how we teach things. We are always telling people time and time again, this idea of never training towards a standard. We think it's a dead end route. Don't train towards a standard.
Agreed.
Train towards proper technique and allow that technique to be your base for whatever standard might be thrown at you. Because as we've seen time and time again, standards change, but then new movements might be exposed. New movements might be thrown at you. And I think you did a great job in kind of fulfilling a lot of things that we preach constantly. So I just want to thank you from our side of things, because it helps our message in terms of saying, technique is critical in you being able to be a better athlete. And don't just look at this in terms of what you see in the past and expect that to be what the future looks like.
Yeah. And I mean, beyond that, it's fun. It's fun to learn new things. It's fun to have your training reinvigorated by not always doing something that you've already done 1,000 times before. I think that is a really important thing too, especially if you're taking this seriously as a professional competitor. I mean, man, how many hours are those guys putting in, and how similar does so much of that training become. I mean, getting out of that rut, at least for some part of your season, can really reignite your passion to get in there and get it done. So, I mean, there's so many benefits to it. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's something that I think people need to come to terms with. And on the other end of that, like to your point about standards, I think that's absolutely the right mindset as well. Standards only exist because they allow for a more objective competition, not because it's the truest expression of the movement. And that is something that people forget all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm thinking about a handstand push-up's a great example. The purest expression of a handstand push-up, I think, Dave, your video of you traversing inverted on the parallel bars and then doing those full range of motion parallel bar handstand push-ups, like that is the truest expression of a handstand push-up right there. Doesn't get any better than that. And so that is what people should be training with in their mindset. That is what I want to express with this movement. It might not look like that at all yet because I'm not there developmentally, but that's what I'm reaching for. And if that is not the ideal and it's just, well, it's good enough because my head touched the mat and I can get lockout and I can do that 50 times in a row, you're missing out and you're going to get exposed at some point if you're a competitor. So I think it's really important people come back to what is the not just competition expression of this movement, but like the pure expression of the ideal. That's what you need to hold in your mind.
Hear that, everybody? Hear that, everybody? We're going to replay that 5 times over again so everyone hears that very clearly.
And send me the clip so I can put it up on my Instagram because
you got it. There was, we'll come back to handstand push-up in a minute, but there was another new movement that I found to be, it was subtle. I don't think most people really noticed it that much, but to me, it was a big step in the right direction in terms of appreciating balance. And we talk about the 10 physical skills a lot, and from a gymnastics perspective, balance is a huge component that I think sometimes gets neglected. Think about the power, think about strength, think about endurance. The pistols that were required to be on one foot, to me, was a huge change in terms of people's perspective as to that movement. Show me you're competent, not only in pressing out, but actually showing me that you're balanced throughout the entire movement. What was the perspective with that little slight change with that movement?
This is exactly that. And you saw it. I mean, it tripped some people up. They had to put a foot down. They bounced out of bounds. I mean, it happened to multiple competitors. And it was exactly that. It was, okay, you know, some of these attributes are a little bit harder to showcase in competition or test in competition without getting too kind of gimmicky or hokey. Or too outside of the expected realm of a CrossFit athlete. And so that was just a simple way to stress that as a particular element. And another very conscious choice for that same reason was the dumbbell squat snatch that came up in that sprint event a little bit later on. You know, that's a very demanding movement as far as your positioning and your ability to do it under pressure. I mean, there are only 6 reps of that per round. And so you had to be really accurate and really impressive with your technique in order to run that and have a good race. So there were
70 and 100 pounds.
It's no joke. Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, the single leg squat like that, yeah, that was exactly the choice was, hey, how do we maximize some of these other components that don't always come to the forefront when you're adding load or asking people to go faster? And hey, I'll say selfishly too, it's way easier to judge the alternating leg. People are always sneaking that leg in there. It's always kind of a question as to whether they got extension before the foot came down. So multiple reasons that was a win, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And another one that I think got a lot of attention was the jump rope variation. And first the single unders, right? And I think we've seen this before where people train double unders and not single unders. And even at the highest level, I mean, we see it probably in the everyday gym because double unders are programmed so often, but the single under should be the precursor, right? You shouldn't just jump right to double unders and expect not to be able to do more simplified movement. Was the intention there to just basically expose, like, hey, are you actually training this movement well and from a well-rounded perspective? And then obviously on the other end of it, the double under with the crossover was something that people were kind of all over with and was a huge step right in terms of actually finishing the workout.
Yeah, I like the idea of the foundation being the bottom rung on the ladder. You know, if I'm perfectly honest about it, I think the single under is probably the one that I don't know that I like it. It was kind of like it was good for what it was, but as far as the things that going back to the drawing board, like would I make that decision again? I don't know. The jury's still out on the single. But I do think it is important that people have the foundation of all the things that they should when they're developing skills. And the single is certainly not outside the realm of what people should be good at. It's not that hard. And I think it's a great example again of people, they have jettisoned all these other elements of jump rope training, which is, like, in my opinion, the jump rope is the tool for developing finesse outside of gymnastics progressions, right? Like that's where you don't have to worry about the intensity being as crazy. You can develop a lot of hand-eye coordination. You can develop timing. You can develop speed. You can develop different motor patterns blending into one another, which is agility. Hard to do that with a lot of other tools. So if people aren't doing that, I mean, I think and like if your jump rope has just become a double under tool. Again, it's as crazy to me as saying, well, I only do the deadlift with the barbell. That's exclusively what I use that tool for. And you're like, really? I mean, you can develop so many other cool things with the barbell. Why would you limit it to just the deadlift? Same thing. And it's funny to me that you see it in the ecosystem too, where you have, and no slight against the people that have done this, I think it, fills a niche, but you start to see the equipment too, right? Like you have people that have these super secret ropes that they keep in, behind a locked case. And this is my double under machine, effectively. You're like, that's cool, but is it really a jump rope anymore? I mean, it's just it's a double under tool, and the jump rope should not be relegated to just that. So and the crossover, I mean, everybody's talking triples, and it's so funny to me that they're got some heat. I mean, fine, fair enough, I'm going to catch some heat no matter what when you program the CrossFit Games, but people are like, well, it should have been triple unders. I'm like, and that would have been less gimmicky than a double with a cross. I mean, how objectively in your mind is that something that would have been acceptable, but a crossover is not? I mean, sure. It's just funny to me where people draw the line.
And when you say that you got some pushback or some heat, is it coming from athletes and from coaches, or just from the community, like trolls on social trying to like just make their voices heard in terms of what they wanted to see?
Honestly, I should go back and say that for the most part, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. To the point where, like, I don't know what to do with it. I've gotten so many messages that have been positive, and that's from across the board, from fans and athletes and everybody. So thank you all for that. But yeah, are there some people that were not as into it? Absolutely. And you can tell by the way that they're a little bit more reserved in what they choose to say to me. And I get it, that's fine. But overall, yeah, I think people were totally fine with it. And again, it's the competitors are interesting sometimes. It's like they want it both ways. There's been years where they're like, hey, CrossFit Games wasn't challenging enough. I really wish that you guys didn't, bring it down to the level of the middle of the pack. I feel like I wasn't pushed enough. And then you have a year like this year where a lot of competitors were pushed, and they're, well, I got a little bit of a mixed feelings about that too. And you're like, okay, well, right. Well, which is it?
Yeah,
I know where I stand. And again, I go back to, like, the games is the games. It's going to stretch you, and that's what it's meant to do. So
yeah, I don't think you're ever going to please everybody. It's just the kind of thing.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a suggestion for you, Adrian, to please everyone next year. So
give it to me.
You're going to do a snatch ladder building, but
okay.
in between, you're going to have a building skill jump rope variation. So you're going to start, 135 snatch, single unders number, 185 snatch, double unders, certain number. Then you're going to get up to like triple under crossover. And then, everybody's going to be quiet. That's, we can keep that under wraps.
There you go.
We can edit that out if you're going to hold on to that, but that's my suggestion.
Perfect.
We'll name it the service. It's just
I like it. Yeah,
it would be the one that I would not get past probably the second round, so it's okay.
Well, I do think that it's like so many different. I think all of us have been around CrossFit for a while. Like you read a lot of old journal articles and you read a lot of Coach Glassman's stuff, and everybody's got a couple of quotes that stick with them from the work that he laid down. And one story that really sticks with me, and is certainly factoring into the approach that I take, is he used to say all the time, he's like, all right, when you've got it right, when the little guy comes up to you after the workout and says, hey, there's too much big guy stuff in this workout. It was totally favoring the bigger, stronger athlete. And the big guy comes up to you afterwards and says, hey, there was too much like technical skill, little guy stuff, like within the same session. And then you go, aha, I got it, and that's what I feel like we got a little bit of, not just within individual tests, because that certainly was the case sometimes, but across the whole week, there was definitely that. It's people, yeah, it's too much gymnastic skill. And you're like, cool. And then, it's too much weightlifting, on the back end. That really heavy back nine event really favored the bigger athlete. And you're like, cool story. So,
well, you ended up finding the best of the best, which ended up being the same best of the best as the last year plus. And the interesting thing for me was how exciting the next few years look in terms of the
yeah,
field. Both on the men's
agreed.
and women's side, we have so many up and coming athletes that are going to start making a real run at a legitimate run at Tia, and who knows what she's going to be doing in the future. But I don't remember a time in my, I guess, short period within CrossFit, but over a decade of watching the games and being at them, where there was so much excitement and saying who's really the next superstar. Could be one of 5 people on both sides, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, and I really think that was the story of this year's games. We saw Champ on the women's side have a rocky start and had to battle back a little bit. And when she was on top, I mean, she crushed it as always. But Medeiros, I mean, if you look at, there's some people that have these statistical flows through the week of where the points were and how people flip-flopped. I don't think it was until event 7 or 8 that Medeiros was within striking distance of first place. And for him to come back and take it is very impressive. And on top of that, like, I think if you pull out and look more broadly, what this year really did offer was an opportunity for people that had a particular skill to come in and steal points from those that were the most well-rounded. And so like Ariel Lowen, great example. She crushed that P-bar workout. Stole some points from the people that were the front runners of the pack. And then you have a couple other outliers in some of these other events that they would get a top 5 finish, steal some points. But that's the name of the game. Overall, the generalist was always in the mix. And that's what this sport is who is the most well-rounded, who can adapt to the most things. Not about, can I have a flashy finish on every event? That's not the name of the game. And that's exactly what we saw this year.
For sure.
Yeah.
And 17 and an 18-year-old on the female side, wearing the leader jersey, and Emma at 17 wearing the leader jersey for a while.
So impressed with her.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see. And it's a testament to these new athletes coming up who grew up with CrossFit.
Yep.
This is a question that I've wanted to ask someone in your position for a while. We're starting to see a lot more athletes. Maybe this is a question outside of the games, but seeing a lot more athletes now grow up with CrossFit as their primary sport. And this is, the first generation of athletes that are kind of in this boat. And I'm curious, from your perspective, do you think that that's the best route for a young athlete to go, to have CrossFit as their base? Or would it be beneficial for an Emma or from some other athletes that are in this growth period to use, yes, CrossFit as a base, but to continue to play ball sports and continue to try to stay as diversified as possible with their background, and then eventually move into something as specific as CrossFit?
I think that it's the latter. I think that people generally, even those that are adults and treating CrossFit as their professional sport, should be doing more things to foster their athleticism. And particularly when you're young, I mean, that window only comes around once. You got to maximize it. So I really think that, were it me, yes, I would encourage my athletes to take the long road and to be exposed to a bunch of different things. And it's exactly the conversation we were having earlier. If you are looking at the CrossFit sport application as a funnel, and you make that funnel so narrow that you're only starting to train with CrossFit competition in mind, you're going to have a short career, in my opinion. But if you are taking the long road, and again, you're adopting the philosophy of, I want to be the most well-rounded, most adaptable, most able to overcome, then you're going to see the utility in, like, yeah, I learn these other things. I dabble with a bunch of stuff, and it all matters, and it all comes into play a little bit later on, because now my athleticism can be on full display when it counts. And so, yes, I think that that's very important. And I would encourage all, young athletes. I think this is true regardless of discipline, that you don't want to rush too soon. You don't want to specialize too soon. I mean, you see this the world over. And I guess, well, this is maybe beyond what we're going to talk about here. But like, I think back to, I used to train acrobatics on a more than casual level, let's say. And, the debate was always kind of between the Chinese style and the Russian style, where Chinese style was you pick the person with the right body type and the right bone structure, and you specialize them right from the jump. And you see how far you could push that. Like, that works under certain conditions when you have 1,000 people in line behind that person that are willing to step in. And then you have more the Russian style, which was a very, very broad general physical preparation base where you do everything. The young athlete under that system was exposed to so many general physical practices. And then later it was determined what sport fit them best. And then you really start pushing that forward. To me, I think that's the superior method, especially when we're talking about something that's as broad as CrossFit. So that's the advice I would give to people, is just, hey, take your time, get as well-rounded as you possibly can. You only get that experience once in your life. Like, you're never young again, so don't rush it. It's hard to do when you're young, because who's got the patience for that? But trust me, it'll pay off in the end.
I was just going to echo what you're saying there, Adrian, because that question gets asked a lot on the weightlifting side of things. A lot of, let's say, general CrossFitters that are falling in love with a sport like that. Oh, Mike, what do you like better, the Chinese method or the Russian method or whatever? And my answer is usually, to be honest, if I have to choose a method between those two, I'm going to go with one that does more GPP planning and looks for longevity in sport. And just from, observations from whether they were American lifters trying to mimic a certain style or that style, I always look at who has the longest competing athletes that look like they're happy and they're healthy. And that's interesting to hear from the acrobatic side. That's not something that I'd ever actually heard. So that falls right in line, though, at least from sport specific with weightlifting. And you can't stress enough what specialization can do to the body and the mind in terms of overuse.
Yeah. And that's another thing too, right? Like, I've worked with a couple of different disciplines over my coaching career. And, as soon as you really start funneling what you're doing into one or two applications, that overuse potential is real. It's just one of those things that you have to contend with. And so I think the more you can avoid that, the better off you're going to be. And indeed, this is, again, kind of getting off track a little bit, but that's what I do. So, if you are an athlete that is playing a sport that's really well defined, that is one of the best utilities of training generally, at least for part of the year, is that you can pull yourself out of some of these movement patterns and overuse potentials, and you can develop a more robust platform that you can then come back and circle back to and really dive in at your sport of choice. And I've seen that time and time again. A great example, we used to work with a rowing team. This was years ago, maybe 15, 16 years ago. And, we were responsible for their dry land training, and we did CrossFit with them. And as far as making them faster in the boat, they were already a championship level team. They're a national level team. I don't feel that we contributed significantly to that. But what I know we did is that we got more of their rowers further in the season than they usually were, because they weren't getting hurt, because they were more resilient when it came time to just grind out the meters on the erg and on the water. And so when it came time to do that, their positions were better. They were more able to withstand that, and they were in the boat longer for that reason. And so I think that is a huge benefit that sometimes gets lost when people are only focused on, was I a second faster or not? It's like, well, yeah, that matters, but that's going to come out more in your sport specific training. Let's look at the other end of your career longevity, how beat up you are at the end of the season, things like that. That matters too. Sometimes a little harder to quantify. But.
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard acrobatics, and I can't move on without knowing a little bit more, because obviously that's a world that I live in pretty closely. And I know you had a little bit of circus background, but can you we don't spend too much time on it.
This is another lifetime ago now.
I'm curious, like what apparatus did you actually train on, and where did you train?
I trained at the San Francisco School of Circus Arts. And I was a generalist. I did a little bit of tumbling. I did a little bit of rope. I did a little bit of Chinese pole. I was the base for a couple of the smaller, lighter athletes, which is crazy because I'm not a huge guy. But yeah, so I dabbled. I mean, I caught for flying trapeze. That was fun.
Wow.
Yep. But again, I didn't take it to a really high level. I mean, it was really just kind of like high level hobbyist. At one point in my life, I thought it would be cool to pursue that as a career, but once I got into it, I was like, I don't think this is going to be for me. And frankly, I don't think I had the talent to do it. The level that so many of those athletes are at is really remarkable. And it just wasn't going to happen for me. So it was a great period of my life. I really loved doing it, but I'm not going to claim that I was any wonder kind of superstar at any of that.
No, that's awesome to hear. What years were you in San Francisco training?
2003. I moved to San Francisco in 2003, and I lived in San Francisco until 2011. And I trained there well, I would say 2003 to 2006, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
We overlapped in San Francisco a little bit.
Oh, cool.
When I was finishing up my Stanford coaching years. But
right on. Yeah.
Yeah, I taught at Circus Warehouse in New York City, and so like I was very closely tied to the acrobatics. My wife is a circus performer, and Sadie's contortionist and aerialist.
Oh, awesome.
Lyra and
Yep.
hammock and all that fun stuff. So we know that world well. So when I hear someone in acrobatics, it always kind of reminds me of good old days in my past as well.
I would bet that we know some of the same people.
I'm sure we do.
It was such a small community at that time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, very cool. Well, we can get back. We can stop reminiscing about fun acrobatic world and talk a little bit more about game stuff. I'm curious if you had an event that played out differently than how you had envisioned. Was there an event that you said this is going to be this particular way? I think, and it played out maybe completely differently in how you had envisioned.
Well, that's a really good question. I'm trying to go down the list in my mind here. Not really. I was surprised at some of the, like, there's a team event called the Muscle Pig, which I really liked. And I was surprised at how few teams finished that. I thought more teams would have finished that one. On the other end, I was surprised at how many teams finished the handstand machine workout. That was one that was very much like, we went into it accepting that this is one where you have to try to beat the test, and there'll be like 2 teams that beat the test. And there were a lot more than that. And so that made me really happy, because that was not an easy event. If you haven't seen that one, go back and watch it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. And that one had a handstand hold in it too, which wasn't on the individual side, but it was the first time they saw an actual handstand hold on a team event. That was another new wrinkle.
Yeah. So those ones, little surprised there. On the indie side, everything was pretty close. I was, honestly, the shuttle jerk event, I think that a lot of athletes overpaced the run, frankly. I was surprised that some of the times on that, they were a little slow, especially compared to our testing, which is usually not the case. Usually when you get the lights on and the competitive pressure, you see things come back that are more aggressive than what we test. And that was the opposite. So that was a little surprising. But I want to pause on that event for a little bit there, because that, I think, is an event that really, in my opinion, it epitomizes CrossFit. And it was a total sleeper in the sense that I don't think people understand how hard that event was. Like, to see it, you're like, yeah, okay, whatever, they're going to run and then put this thing over your head. You're like, no. You go run a 3-minute 800, which is not crazy fast, but like, it's fast enough. And then put 90% of your 1 rep max over your head for reps. Like, you go try it and report back, because that is one that just
that's one of the workouts that I've loved, like, style of workouts that I've loved ever since I got involved with CrossFit, because that's the one that younger CrossFitters, like, that haven't been in the sport very long, are like, oh, the weightlifting people are going to crush that.
Yeah.
And then that's the one, like somebody, if this was 5 or 6 years ago, would have been like, oh, Mike, how do you think you would do on that one? That's so, that's a light jerk for you. And I'm like, I probably wouldn't get one. Or, it's like, those are the humility builders for the
Yep.
specialists. And then those are the ones
Absolutely.
that, like you said, some people overpaced. And I think they were probably just respecting the percent of weight on the bar and thinking like, the last thing I want to do is get to that bar and miss that
Right.
lift.
When you saw that, I mean, there were some big
Yeah.
names that their legs just weren't there, and they had a real hard time driving that thing off the chest.
Yeah.
And that event had 2 points to it, right?
Yep.
There were points for the run and there were points for the jerk. There were a few athletes that they knew, listen, I'm not going to win the jerk. I'm not going to get that many. So
Yep.
Haley went balls to the wall on the run, and she's like, I'm going to maximize my points in the area that I know I can,
Yep.
and then whatever number I get on the jerk, I'm going to, be happy with. So you could see that some of the veteran athletes had a little bit of a strategy around making sure they maximize the points, since it was a 2-point total in that particular event.
Yeah. And good. I'm like, I think that's great that number one, you play to your strengths when you can. And number two, I think it pulls the race. I mean, how can you help? I mean, it takes a lot of discipline to see a Haley Adams tearing off on the field and you not giving chase.
Right. Right.
So
Absolutely.
that was fun to watch. And man, what a great runner. I mean, just a joy to watch her run. She looks so effortless. I just can't get over it. I was actually rewatching that last night. And man, her running technique is just such a pleasure to watch in action, just so easy, no big deal, outpacing the field. Great.
I feel like
great
that's
to watch.
probably for her a testament of like living with somebody who's a pretty good running coach from like early on and ascribing to methods that maybe some people don't get till later on in life.
Yeah.
Is there somebody that has a better determined face than Haley too? Like when there's a close up on Haley, it's like, this girl's gonna win. I don't know what she's doing right now, but this girl's gonna win. Anything she's doing, I believe in this girl, man. She's incredible.
Absolutely. And it's the juxtaposition between that and her post event interview is so funny too, because she's just so like lighthearted and bubbly. And you're like, man, you just went from kill mode to like normal 20 something in a split second, like it's just, it's so funny.
Love her. She's
awesome.
She's been with us at Power Monkey camp since she was like 15 years old. So we've watched her growing up and have always been cheering from the sidelines for her. So
yeah, right on.
Adrian, I have one more question kind of along those lines from like expectations or surprises. Is there like across the board, maybe not even like on individual side, but teens or masters, was there like a little bit of a Cinderella story for you? Just something that really, sticks out as a moment or a person that did something that maybe you weren't expecting or they weren't expecting?
I mean, seeing this 60 plus ladies all knock out some weighted pull-ups was awesome. I mean, that was exactly what I'd hoped for, but just to see it in action, you're like, dude, how cool is that? Just things like that, I think are totally cool to see. There's a story of one of the lower extremity adaptive athletes that would have placed female lower extremity adaptive athlete. And forgive me, I can't remember her name right now, but I think she would have placed like 28th or 26th in the women's field at that swim event. So
I watched her heat. It was crazy. Yeah.
Yep. There's some stuff coming out of that pool event that I think is really, really cool. So some stories there. I mean, the whole men's sandbag event was just absolutely ridiculous. How many of them made it that far? Did not expect that. I don't think they expected that. It was crazy. We had one of our guys, Rob Lawson, who was helping with the judging. Part of his responsibility was to keep track of how many people were still in, how many had dropped out, and he's keeping us updated. And I think we were at the 320 or 330 bag, and he gets on the radio and he's like, Boz, we have 2 bags left. We still have 16 lifters. It's like, what? This is out of control. That is not at all what we expected. So, there's some very cool moments that came out, and that's the whole point, right? You gotta run the race to see that sort of thing and to be inspired by it. These guys always rise to the challenge. So it's fun to see.
I think, Boz, that was Molly Moore that was the lower extremity.
It might have been, yeah.
I think so, yeah. So
another event that got a lot of great press in terms of how it finished was the Capitol event. I mean, I know that the way it ended and the way the community just rallied around Rebecca when she was like going up the steps there, it was incredible to watch. And I saw you were right there, right? You were there kind of holding back the crowd and everything. Was it something that was palpable to you too, to be able to actually be there in person and say like, this is happening, what's happening here is much different than what I envisioned, and this is actually something that's going to be memorable for games moving forward with how that thing ended?
Um, it, that event number one went off way better than I expected. Like I expected it was going to be a big event. I mean, we planned that for so many months with the city,
Mm-hmm.
and just the length of that event and the scale of it was a big challenge for many reasons. And so I knew that was going to be a cool event. I knew that, like, I love the staircase finish. I think it's just such a simple element that is so challenging. Anytime you have that kind of hill vertical displacement element, like that just adds a whole other dimension of challenge that I think a lot of people don't consider. It's really hard,
Mm-hmm.
way harder than just going in a straight line. So I knew that event was going to be good. The crowd response to it was awesome, and so cool to see the support that all those athletes received, and how into it people were. I mean, so that made me really happy. As far as like in the moment, are you thinking about, oh, this is one for the books? No, not at all. I mean, you're just in it. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was really a joy too, because like I literally could not be thinking forward at that moment. It was just like, this is happening, and that's all you're concerned about. So yeah, I don't know what to say. I mean, it was an insane atmosphere down there in the best possible way.
Mm-hmm.
Just the support, the respect that the spectators clearly had for the athlete. I think it was genuine, that they wanted the best for the athlete, as evidenced by the fact that they were willing to not only get involved, but then listen to us as we got them involved. It wasn't just like this mob scene, which it very easily could have been. But testament to the caliber of people that show up for these types of events, and I really do think that shows, by and large, CrossFit Games fans and spectators, they still participate in it. They still have a link to the thing. They still understand on a visceral level, maybe not a specific level, the challenges that these athletes are facing, and so they get it, and they know how to respond in kind. So yeah, that was just wild. I don't know what
Yeah.
else to say about it. It
Yeah,
was,
I think it ended up being one of the most iconic shots of the games,
yeah,
that shot of her walking up the steps with the crowd cheering their asses off behind her. It's one of the iconic shots, I think, of not just this
yeah.
game, but probably any games.
And I'm a big believer that things like that have to be organic. You cannot, I don't think you could set out to be like, okay, we're going to have this big capital event, we're going to fill the crowd in, and it's going to be really cool, and
Sure.
people are going to love it forever. I mean, if that was what we had set out to do, I think the end result would be underwhelming.
Hmm.
You have to let things develop on their own, and you have to let them play out, and you can't force moments like that. Like, there's an authenticity that has to be allowed to develop, and if you try to curate that to the degree that you're expecting it, it's not going to happen.
Hmm.
You're going to miss it. So
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, there's another thing I want to dive back into. We mentioned it briefly earlier, but I want to go into a little bit more in depth, especially with your background at judge. I want to talk a little bit about judging and standards,
yeah,
specifically around the handstand pushup. And it's an endless battle. I think it's a challenge
yep,
to be able to not only come up with a standard that is sufficient and that is, you know, workable for everyone. But the first question has to do with being able to find qualified judges that are professional judges and not just a volunteer. From your perspective, is that something that needs to be really kind of tapped into at a higher level moving forward? You have professional refs and professional umpires and people that their lives are devoted to making sure they understand the ins and outs of all of the things they're going to see out on a field. And when you have a judge in a CrossFit setting at the game, seeing a movement for the first time and then being able to expect to judge it equally across the board, how do you envision a way to kind of deal with that or to manage that so that there is a level playing field and there is an equal playing field for all athletes involved?
that's a great question, and I think that there's, where to start. We'll start with kind of where we are now. In CrossFit Games modern era, the individual judges are all paid staff. They are level 1 seminar staff, and so they have been well versed in these movements. Many of them have been there on the field for a decade. We had a few new people this year, but it's the same people that have been coming year after year after year, by and large. And same thing with the volunteer judges that are handling the team and age group divisions and the adaptive divisions. These are people that have been judging at local events. They've been judging at regional and semifinal events. They've been coming to the games. They're coming back to the games. We sift through those names every year. And I mean, I'll give you an example broadly. I think we had 1,800 applications for all volunteers this year for 600 spots. And so that includes judges and everybody else. But so, I mean, that gives you just kind of an idea of the scope of people that want to be involved, and then those that we handpick to be involved. So it's not like people are just showing up for the first time and saying, what am I doing? And kind of getting back to what we talked about off camera before we started, people forget that this sport is still in its infancy. And so when you say professional judge or professional referee, it's like, okay, well, what is the outlet for that? I mean, can someone make a living doing that in 2022? Maybe there's a very few that can, as like an official of CrossFit the sport. But by and large, no, it's going to have to be volunteer until the ecosystem gets large enough that can be a paid position for more people. But we're just not there yet. As far as like judges education and that sort of thing, I think there's a huge area there that can be improved on. And that's something that I think as an organization, we need to take responsibility for and put more materials out. And that's certainly in the works. We've hired some new people this year that are going to help us with that. So yes, in the coming years, I hope that that's something that we're able to offer, because I agree that we could be doing a lot more there. As far as, seeing a movement and then having to execute on it, I think that's something else that people don't take into consideration, is that a lot of times the judges will have a meeting early. Once they get on site, first thing, they get the workouts revealed to them typically. And rule number one is you don't talk about the events, like that's just the nature of the beast. And then they have rehearsal days leading up until the first day of competition. So they're there behind the scenes. They have the demo team with them. The demo team is going over reps. They see things that are going to be common mistakes. They get to talk about what does the correct execution look like? What does it look like when this is a borderline rep? And so, we do our best to try to prepare them, even for some of these new movements that they may not have had months and months of experience. They do get a lot of behind the scenes practice, so that when they're out on the field, it's as consistent as we can be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was going to be one of my questions about when do the judges actually get the workouts?
Yeah.
Would it be beneficial at all? And maybe it's just not possible for them to know, not even the workouts, but the movements that they would be seeing earlier on, so they can get familiar with it? Or is that like maybe open up a can of worms in terms of, certain things getting out?
That makes me a little wary at this point, especially these days. Hold on one second.
Sure.
I think that's probably possible for some of the common movements, but makes me a little wary. And I'll tell you that and not because I don't trust anybody who's coming out to donate their time and to do this, but because there are a lot of unscrupulous actors that are more than willing, under the guise of friendliness or genuine interest in the sport, to strike up a conversation with somebody, pluck a little something that was said innocently or whatever, and then blast it all over the internet. Mm-hmm. In a really destructive way. And if you don't have experience dealing with people that want to needle you for something that and they don't, if you don't have experience dealing with people that are bad faith actors and have a media platform from which they're going to broadcast from, that's a tall order to ask people to keep a secret under those conditions. So I hesitate with that sort of thing, at least at this stage of the game.
Yeah, it's understandable. And I think one of the take-home points there from my perspective is, listeners out there, people involved with the games, understand that CrossFit from a competitive standpoint is still in its infancy. It's still getting its legs under itself. It's still kind of learning the ins and outs of what's possible in terms of how to run a competition at a super high level. And every iteration is better than the previous. And it's going to take a little bit of time to kind of iron out all the kinks.
I mean, it
Yeah,
would be
well,
fun. It
and
would be fun, Boz. You can, have a rebuttal to anybody that's kind of bashing the, like, let's say, professionalism of CrossFit. Look at any other, like, look at American football, look at basketball, look at anything
sure.
15 years into its inception. If we put videos up of how they were doing things and moving, it would just be comical. But at the same time, it was part of the process to get where it was going. So, like, I
Well,
think I think you guys have historically always done a good job of using the games and the competitions as an assessment of how to move forward and progress and make better, make safer, make more interesting the sport. So I think, yeah, just always remembering that it's still a very young, amateur, semi-professional sport.
yeah, yeah, and I, not to take away anything from the team, I think what we do is remarkable, and I would put what we can accomplish out there as a big event against anything else in the world. I mean, the dynamic nature of what we are asking people to do every year, and often with limited information until it's time to execute. And I'm not talking about judging, but I'm talking about people putting out the equipment. I'm talking about signage. I'm talking about broadcast. This is not a contained game that has the same rule set every single time that you go out there on the field. This is going to be something unique every time by definition. And to execute on that is very, very difficult. And I think that I certainly have an accepted tolerance for things that are going to be unexpected because of those conditions. And that's not to say that I am willing to accept a subpar product or a subpar competition. No, not at all. I think anybody that's worked with me and has seen how seriously I take this, like I can be very direct at times, and you have to be. But there, with the dynamic nature of what the thing is, you have to accept some degree of uncertainty as part of the process. That's just the nature of the beast. And it's always going to be that way to some degree. The moment that we have this thing like totally codified and you're just on autopilot, it's like it's not the CrossFit Games anymore. It's just not.
Yep. I have one more technical question for you.
Okay.
And I keep bringing it up with the handstand push-up. I loved seeing that in there, but
Yeah.
maybe for reasons that other people didn't appreciate. And I'm curious what you were trying to get out of it. Obviously, wall-facing handstands are something that we use in gymnastics endlessly. Wall-facing handstand push-up variation. They add a component to the idea of what we talked about from earlier of working towards the highest level version of that movement, with that angle being in place, which mimics more of a freestanding variation rather than back to wall, which I think is great. Kept hearing this idea of midline stability. Midline stability was kind of a secondary consideration because athletes were able to worm through the movement as they fatigued. But to me, the big separator there, and the thing that I loved about it, was the deficit component on the ballistic block. And the reason for it was because it forced athletes' head forward.
Yes.
It forced athletes into a more proper tripod position that was never in place when you're doing just back to wall or head in line with the handstand push-up. So what it did, it exposed a weakness in tricep pushing for athletes that are not strong there. And to me, that was incredible to see, because we've been trying to preach forever, like, let's get people into a better tripod so it can translate into a freestanding and translate into higher level variation. That ballistic setup did exactly that. It forced athletes to use their triceps in a way that they hadn't before. From my perspective, it was done hopefully with intention, but I wanted to get your thoughts on whether or not that was a purpose behind it.
Oh, you nailed it. And it's exactly what we talked about earlier, where the challenge to me when I'm putting some of these things in is, again, I'm looking at the purest expression of what the thing is. And in this case, the purest expression of what this thing is a deficit freestanding handstand push-up where you are not able to get that little bit of reset by balancing on your head or taking the load off of your arms. That is the purest expression of that movement, in my opinion. So how do we recreate that in a way that isn't this gigantic quantum leap from what we've done in the past to what we're expecting today? And we can do it in a way that is able to be judged relatively easily and accurately across a field of athletes under competition stress. So that's the challenge, is how do you marry those two things up? And I think we did a pretty good job. And yes, that's exactly what the block was meant to do, was to break people out of this position. And you saw it. I saw this in testing. We saw it happen in competition, where the people that could not get out of this hands in line with my head to try to maximize my leverage for a predetermined standard that I'm used to, the people that could not break out of that had a really hard time with that event. But the people that were accustomed to what a handstand push-up is striving to be, they could figure it out and they could get into a position and press. I mean, again, Guy was an amazing example of this. He was getting extra credit on all of his reps. The depth that he was able to achieve, the power that he was able to use to get out of the bottom. I mean, that pressing strength was just, you look at that and you're like, yeah, he's got it. There's no question here. Tola Marqueño was another one. I don't know if you saw him on the team competition, but my goodness, beautiful. If you want a great kind of textbook look at what that should have been in competition, go see his reps on that team comp. I mean, it was just like, yep, that's it. He's got it, you know?
I love it. I love it. And I appreciate the thought process that was put into it. And from my perspective, from a gymnastics background, you nailed it. You nailed it in terms of being able to expose athletes. And what was also noticeable, and I would encourage listeners to go and look back, just because you're good at a handstand and handstand walking doesn't translate to you automatically being good at a handstand push-up. And we end up seeing as athletes that maybe won the handstand obstacle course really struggle in the handstand push-up event. And I think it's important to note, training a handstand does not translate into all variations of handstands being, something that you're good at. So
yeah, stacking strength and pressing strength, very different things.
Different.
It's
totally different.
Yeah, you see it. And one more thing on that, actually, Dave, that I'll give you was we had a lot of people in testing try to convince me that it should just be 2 blocks with a gap between them for the head. And I was like, absolutely not. That completely modifies and changes the nature of what's happening here. Because again, you can get people into that position where their hands are totally in line with their head. They can use that same kind of leverage that they have attempted to maximize without working towards the harder version of the skill. And so that was one of the things that in testing I was very strong against. As soon as people were like, well, maybe it should be 2 blocks, these guys are really struggling, I'm like, no, absolutely not. That completely changes the nature of this. And same thing, that was another thing I was really hard line about it in testing. People were like, well, maybe it's going to be a little harder to judge when they get their head below the line. Maybe they should touch an object at the bottom. No, absolutely not. The difficulty is not having that reset of balancing on your head or taking the load off your arms. That absolutely had to be a big part of it. And so those are 2 rejections that were like total non-starters for me, despite the fact that some of the members on the team who I respect very much were like, yeah, I don't know, maybe we need to do this. I was like, no, put my foot down. This is not part of this test.
Well, I think it was a win in terms of exposing athletes to a more proper working towards, like we said, what they probably, I mean, I don't see it out of the realm of possibility for a freestanding handstand push-up to be something they're going to have to be exposed to at some point. Maybe not a deficit yet, but I know your real wheels are already turning for what's coming next, and you probably have another whole list of fun exercises. Whether that's these are the ones that I've always hoped to see out there, but a strict toes to bar or a pullover or a freestanding handstand push-up. These things that on the gymnastics side are the next step, the next iteration, the next kind of level that I'm sure you're already playing around with.
I'll give you guys a soundbite, and this is a fun one because I've had a lot of people that are like, wow, you did a lot this year. What are you going to do next year? And I'm like, oh, shoot, I'm all out of ideas. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm a physical culture junkie. I mean, I love all aspects of folk sports and activities that have been going on since the dawn of time, so to speak. Like I have a ton of those old strength and health magazines from the 30s. I mean, I grew up watching World's Strongest Man competitions with my dad on Christmas. They always used to re-air them. I did gymnastics growing up. I mountain biked everywhere. I mean, I love physicality. And there are so many untapped realms. I think it's funny that people kind of pigeonhole me as like, oh, we did acrobatics. He's a gymnastics guy. Yeah. Okay, cool. Keep thinking that.
Well, I think it's interesting. Before we started the podcast, you held up a little chart. It's 3 days, 4 days past you getting home, and you're already starting to get things ready to go. There, he's holding it up. Are you already thinking about next year? Has the process started? You giving yourself a little bit of a break? And second question, do you do this all on your own, or how many people are kind of assisting with kind of coming up with key concepts around the workouts?
So first question, yes, but not because I'm putting my nose to the grindstone, but just because I'm allowing myself that as ideas come, I will just note them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, in that sense, next year I've already got some pen to paper, so to speak. Nothing concrete, but I do have a couple of concepts that I'm already like, okay, that could be really cool based on what we saw this year. But I mean, it's nothing serious yet. And I'll also say that there are some things that I left off the table this year because it just didn't fit, or there was already enough that we were doing. And so there's already some leftovers that didn't make it into the games this year that are there. So to me, it's all about just kind of letting those things come as they come, because you can't force that creative process. It's like a creative process in anything. If you're like, well, it's 9 o'clock, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to be creative for an hour. Like, cool, but it's probably not going to be that good. So as they're coming in, as it's still fresh, I'm definitely documenting some of that. But the process hasn't really started in earnest.
Mm-hmm.
And then as far as other people, I mean, I have a really supportive team, overwhelmingly so. It's a big deal to me to take the first pass at things. And like, I really do see myself as kind of the curator. And so I try to pull in the collection of stuff that I think is really good. And then I give that to the team to look at and poke holes in and say, hey, this is probably a good idea. This is probably a bad idea. And like I said, with the handstand work, like, there's some things that I'm going to put my foot down and I'm like, no, this is happening this way, and we're going to do it. Like, that's just the way it's happening. And then there's other things where they temper me and they say, hey, this is not a great idea. It's not going to play that well. This is a better way to approach it. And great, I'm all ears.
Mm-hmm.
If it's one person, you're going to miss a lot of good ideas if you're too rigid with that. So yeah, I want to take the first pass. I want to organize things in a way that I think makes sense to me. And then it can't just be me. It's got to be a team effort.
It's exciting, man. I'm
Yeah.
excited to see what's going to come next. And obviously, we had a whole year to it, but we're going to be watching closely. And Mike, I apologize for dominating a lot of the questions here, but before we get Boz out of here, anything else you want to ask?
No. I mean, I got over an hour of FaceTime with him, and I would just affirm one thing he said earlier, where he said he's like a stickler for details, or he can be very direct. If anybody has seen my clean shaven, short haired face in front of the white screen, there was probably a take of like 10 to 15 overhead squats where he's like, Mike, you're a little bit crooked here, and that's not going to look very good. I'm like, so it was really funny. I was like, wow, he's like, yeah, he wants this to look perfect. So I think we can all have very high expectations of you moving forward in this role. And you definitely didn't let me down when some people asked what I thought it would be like with you. And I said, from my experience knowing him, I think it's gonna have some surprises for the better. And I think everybody got that out of the games.
Well, thanks. I mean, I really appreciate that. It's very kind of you guys to say that. And I think the old adage holds true that you shouldn't take my word for it. We shouldn't take this one year as evidence of much. Like, it's my responsibility to continue to show the community that I'm going to show up for it. And, I take that really seriously. So don't let me rest on my laurels. I'm going to be working hard and doing my homework to make sure that we keep pushing that rock up the hill. That's the job.
We believe it. We believe it. Before we get you out of here, some quick questions for you if you're up for them.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm hoping to get a point on this one, but what sport or discipline do you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics?
Pass. It's like I'll take gymnastics.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No
We had two guests on earlier in the week, and they both picked weightlifting. So I was like, all right, I needed another one in my bucket. So, any guests that you think would be great for us to have on the podcast? Somebody you've maybe come across, or someone might be a good interview.
Oh man, that's a really good question. Off the cuff, no, and that's I feel like I'm doing like 20 people a disservice by saying that. Let me think about that a little bit. My brain's still a little bit mush from the week, but this community, no surprise, is full of just amazing people with a lot of hidden talents and a lot of crazy aptitudes. So yeah, no shortage of interesting people
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One more for you. If you're a reader.
Wait, how about this? Sean Rocket, one of our
Sean, we've had
Dr.
Sean out
Rocket.
at camp in the
We like
past.
Sean.
Sean's
He's
great.
awesome.
Yeah, we'd love, and I know that.
And hey, all you CrossFit Games fans out there, Dr. Rocket, he's our head orthopedist on the medical staff, and he just got his double under cross. And I mean,
Oh, really?
He's old, so what's your excuse?
Absolutely, Jordan. I think he's up your way too. He's in the Boston area, so maybe we can convince Dr.
He and his wife Rhonda are just awesome people.
Absolutely, we can have a little reunion. We'd love to have him on. If you are a reader, is there a book that you've been reading lately that you'd recommend? And if not, any TV show or movie that you'd recommend?
I am a reader. I haven't had a lot of time to read recreationally since the games. I'll go with the stock recommendation that I think is the good one for anybody who's involved in anything creative or anything that they're serious about, and that's the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. It's a good one if you haven't read it. It's an easy read. It's great.
All right, fantastic. I'll have to check that one out. Mike, anything you want to add in there?
Oh, no, I mean, I wish I could do a virtual hug, like a real hug, not a virtual hug right now, and end on that. Yeah.
Mike's a hugger. Mike's a hugger.
I'll give you one of those.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to see you in person, Adrian. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It was, I don't guest host all of the episodes, but this was one that I called. I said, I want this one.
Oh, that means a lot. I appreciate you guys.
Well, do you have anything coming up? Where can people find you? Anything coming up that you want people to know about?
Oh, I don't have anything on the books for a hot minute here, thankfully. So no, I don't. I have an Instagram account. I'm not super active on it. Although during the games, I did my best to try to, put a bunch of stories out there and repost stuff that people were doing within the community. But I mean, I'm pretty low key. You can find me in my garage working out. And if anybody's in Nashville, look me up. I'm always happy to get a workout in with anybody who's willing to come and throw down. So reach out.
Fantastic. And I know we mentioned this before we started recording, but Nashville is not that far away from Crossville, where we have our camp. We would absolutely love to have you out at some point and come play around with us. So
man, that would be.
We're always looking for volunteer drivers. So if somebody's arrived, sometimes we get late arrivals like 1 a.m. or so. If you're up for that,
don't threaten me with a good time. I love staying up late.
Thanks again, Boz. Really appreciate the time and giving us a little insight into what happened at the 2022 CrossFit Games. Amazing job, and appreciate the time again today. For all the listeners out there, be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for services and upcoming events. Check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durante, and at Mike Service. On behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your hosts. I'm Dave Durante with my co-host Mike Service. And until next time, thank you all for listening.